permissible value ranges. That's and then I go on to list like defined structuring constant, gravitational, cosmological, and
Well,
proton neutron mass difference.
yeah, okay. So honestly, the
Their
first part,
symbols or values, their permissible variation. Yeah.
yeah, I was going to say the first part of that claim that says that those constants have to exist for there to be a physical energy or whatever universe. If we look at just the little snippet of Fred Adams' paper, and this could be taken out of context, so obviously take that with a grain of salt. If we just look at the paper, it says that if some of the constants were different, then life could actually exist and be better. That I think would imply the existence of energy and matter and space and time. And he's implying that the constants could be different. So isn't that at least potentially kind of a refutation of that? Like if it's at least philosophically possible that constants could be different, doesn't that at least undermine that first claim?
Well, it's undermining the idea that he's only attacking the extremely narrow margins that these life permitting
Right.
circumstances or conditions exist within. And I mean, that's
Right.
fine.
Well,
Truth be told, for the purposes of this context and for the purposes of my position, I can just go ahead and grant that. I just go ahead and grant it.
right.
Doesn't matter because
Okay.
the constraints that are applied through a derivation later in the paper, it
Mhm.
is such that it's not a life permissibility argument that I'm making. It's
W-
just not.
Okay. Well, is it because like part of your first premise was to claim that these constants are necessary for there to be a universe of space, time, matter, energy. I assume that's what it was. And what I'm saying is Fred Adams' paper is saying that life could even exist better on different constants. So that would imply also that, and again, maybe he makes a different claim. Maybe something not energy, not mass, or whatever exists in another universe. But like, it seems at least philosophically possible that time, matter, energy, and space could exist with the constants being different. And it looks like Fred Adams is at least implicitly making that case. So I guess,
Usually has constant values throughout space and its negative pressure upon the universal acceleration of advancement is measured by a value extremely small, but in joule per cubic meter makes up about 60.
I mean, I could be misunderstanding. I'm no, you know, quantum physicist, so I have no idea. But
Yeah,
Yes, the two things
what
I
he's
sent are
doing,
basically
Fred?
just talking about that.
Yeah,
yeah,
Fred Adams' argument regarding the fine tuning suggests that life still exists even with a different vacuum energy density value, challenging the idea that the parameter is required for precise tuning. Um,
well, because look, he's talking
yeah,
about
he's challenging the cosmological constant itself.
sure, well, sure, yeah. So he's saying the constants could be different, and he proposes a
No,
model, a
a
constant.
constant, the cosmological constant, which is really a stand-in placeholder to describe the to the energy present in empty space. In physics, it represents the energy of the quantum vacuum or the lowest energy state of quantum fields. This is also known as dark energy
Hmm.
or the dark energy constant. So
Sure.
it's really just a stand-in placeholder. And what he's theorizing here is that in fine-tuning discussions, the vacuum energy density is significant because its value appears to be extraordinarily small compared to that of quantum field theory, that which quantum field theory predicts. Um, yeah, let me read this real quick. It says that the deviation is over 120 orders of magnitude, and that the discrepancy is known as the cosmological constant problem. If this value was slightly larger, the universe would expand too rapidly for galaxies to form, blah, blah, blah. So,
Hmm.
yeah, what he's saying here is that the the effects of dark energy and dark matter that we observe uh, could have been different to allow life permissibility, and that's fine. I can look.
Yeah.
I don't agree with his position, but I can just go ahead
Sure.
and grant it for the sake of the position that I'm putting forward because my position doesn't hinge on it.
Okay. So
One of your premises, it appears as if one of your premises is literally making that claim. So if that claim just turns out to be false, then your premise one is just off the table.
yeah, it really does sound like your claim is saying the universe has to be this way because the constants are this way. We measure them this way, and that's what I'm understanding your first premise to be. So if your first premise isn't that the constants have to be this way, then I guess I'm wrong. But then I'm not sure what your first premise is.
It's just outlining that there is a connection between the material conditions of space-time matter and energy and mathematical quantification. And according to the the postulates in fine tuning, that these are extraordinarily narrow light permitting regions within the possible value ranges. That's really all it's
Yep,
saying.
that claim
So
will just turn out to be
this
false.
is just a, okay, according to what empirical data that he has proposed, because so far as I can tell, he hasn't provided empirical data as in testable, observable, and repeatable data. All he has is a hypothesis. He has speculation. He has a mathematical model that says, well, it could have been different, but the problem here is that it wasn't different.
And I take it
Hold on.
your guy that you're
No, it's not
referencing
merely
does have
it's
some
not merely
falsified.
just yeah, it's not merely that the constants could have been different. That's not merely what the claim is. The claim
It's
is
a
literally
constant. You don't even know what he's saying. He's saying
the claim
a
he talks about
the
you haven't read, but
cosmological constant
he
could
talks
have
about
been
more.
different.
He talks. I'm pretty confident you like put this into ChatGPT and got the analysis and think you know everything now. But if you actually read it, he talks about more than just one constant.
Yeah, he talks about the
Okay, so
strong
again, you just don't know what you're
force.
talking about. So
Yeah.
anyway, um, he makes his claims pretty clear here, and the SAP goes over his claims pretty clear here. It literally states, according to him, the range of parameters for which the universe would have been habitable is quite considerable. That would just mean this narrow range talk turns out to just not be the case because there's actually a considerable amount of life permitting ranges that we could have been in. Right. So again, that just undermines that claim there. And you asked for one physicist, by the way. So I gave you the physicist, and now you're like, oh well, this is just a physicist. I mean, you asked for the guy.
You should look at the paper.
I mean, sure, I don't mind looking at the paper. In fact, I like learning what alternative hypotheses, alternative theories, alternate explanations have to say. But again, I'm not making a fine tuning argument. I'm evoking fine tuning data as one thing, one data point in a much broader argument, right? So even if he's right and the life permissibility values, that range of permissibility is much larger than previously anticipated or previously thought, and also affirmed by Penrose, Guth, Valinkin,
Okay.
Swinburne, Krauss, all these other guys. If that is different, then it doesn't change. It doesn't change my argument. I'm not arguing from a position of life permissibility. I'm just reasserting something that is found within well um, widely accepted fine tuning assertions. That's all I'm doing here.
So
I'm
you
not making a life permissibility argument.
so you're just saying that there are values that exist. If I recall, kind of what premise one was saying, it's like there are these values that exist that allow for, I don't know, time, space, matter exists, whatever it is. There's a small range of that have permissibility that can create universes, and that range is somehow less than the totality of all possible iterations of that, right? That there's like a pie, right? And there's a slice of pie that is, where the constants exist or something, and that's not all of the pie. It's a slice, not the whole pie. That makes sense. Is that kind of what you're? I'm trying to recall what premise one was saying, because you're telling me that it's not that that it's these specific constants that allow for time, energy, space, whatever. You're saying it's not that these specific constants are the only ones that allow for life. You're saying that perhaps there's other constants, but, and I don't know what the but is, but you're just stating that we measure these constants in this particular universe. Is that what you're saying? Then I would say, okay, sure, that we have a model that shows this, and we have these constants like in this
I'm
universe.
literally only citing cosmological data from the fine tuning
Okay, so you're
empirically sourced source. That's all I'm doing is
so okay.
reasserting data. That's it. This
Okay.
is just a data claim.
Okay, so you're just saying that we have measured constants. You know, you're just saying that, like,
Yes,
okay, all right.
How do
So,
you think the constants are measured? Do you think we have like we just look outside and we know that the constants are? How do you think they're measured?
varying different ways. For the Planck derivation is going to be evoking like the speed of light constant. For gravitational constant, it's going to be, oh shit, how do they derive the gravitational constant? it's going to be variable depending on what constant and material condition that the constant interacts with. Like the strong and weak nuclear force and the fine structuring constant are going to be different from gravity. Gravity is going to be different from the speed of light. That's going to be different from the Planck time derivation. That's going to be different from other the other constants. So I mean, it depends. Which one specifically do you want to know more about? Like gravity is going to be evoking relativity, Einstein's field equations for one, which demonstrate the critical dependence of space-time dynamics, uh, quantum electrodynamics, or the fine structuring constant appears in those in these equations for governing electromagnetic interactions, and the slight variations would prevent stable atom formations, making complex chemistry impossible, for instance. These are going to govern over processes like nucleosynthesis. The equation governing hydrogen fusion uh, depends critically on the proton-neutron mass difference. A 1% change would disrupt element formation, preventing the emergence of carbon-based life. So yeah, all I'm doing in the first few premises is asserting uh, widely accepted cosmological and astrophysics uh, data points, right? So I'll go ahead and grant that there could be a much broader range of life permissibility that the fine tuning argument isn't taking into account. Sure, fine, granted, don't care. It's not relevant to my position
Would you
because I'm not
also
making a life permissibility argument.
are you willing to grant that the constants that we know, there could be other arrangements, or the constants could be different? Are you willing to grant that?
Mm, what do you mean by that?
Well, like I was saying, my understanding of Fred Adams' paper is that, the constants could change in such a way that also allows for the permission of life. But let's remove the permission of life. He's just essentially in a more upper level, a more higher level kind of analysis. He's saying the constants could be different, and he's saying that like there's a
Um,
model where a universe could exist, with the constants being different. Because again, the claim is that if the constants were different, we wouldn't have the life we have now. The universe wouldn't exist how it does now. But it sounds like Frederick Adams
well,
has at least imagined a scenario where the constants actually could be different. And I could be wrong about that, but that's my understanding. So,
certain. I'm willing to grant a little bit of latitude in certain constants, especially if we're making an argument for life permissibility, right? I think that
mhm.
the fine tuning argument it it gets a little bit speculative as far as the Bayesian probability analysis that applies to life permissibility specifically.
Yeah.
This is based off of what we know to be the case, and as far as determining priors for this Bayesian analysis, this is something that is continually updated as new cosmological data comes in. So
Hmm.
the initial set of parameters that they use as the priors has a little bit of ambiguity built in, but these become more refined and more substantial as time goes on and more data gets inserted into this analysis. So I'm not terribly worried about that. But again, I'm not making a life permissibility argument. But
Right.
if you're going to say something like a universe that is comprised of space, time, matter, and energy um, is going to behave differently as far as nucleosynthesis goes, and that the equation that we have for that, the proton neutron mass difference equation, is going to not critically depend on the proton mass difference, or I'm sorry, the proton neutron mass difference, and that a 1% change would disrupt elemental formation, which would prevent the emergence of any kind of complex chemistry uh, or result in a universe that has anything larger than hydrogen or helium in it, which would, I think, probably prevent stellar formation. But if he's going to make assertions like that, I would probably disagree. If
Okay.
he's just going to say that there's a larger permissibility range of life permitting values in these constants, okay, maybe, sure, I guess. I don't really
Okay.
care to be honest with you because it's not germane to the position that I hold.
Okay. So, trying to summarize, just so I'm on the same page. Potentially, the constants could be different. You're not exactly 100% sure they're not. I mean, of course, I don't think we're absolutely sure of anything, but like you're not 100% sure that they could be, but it's at least, you know, possible that they could be different. But you're willing to say that it seems likely, at least for the universe we're in, the constants are this way.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay. So
And I even build in the potential for new emergent data to say that these constants, um, in the colloquial sense, aren't exactly constant, as in there's new theories or there's new data emerging
right.
that suggest that certain constants, like the cosmological constant, for instance, based off of some new information coming in from JSWT and I think the SETI project specifically,
Right.
that speak to this idea that the cosmological constant could have a tiny bit, and I can't remember the quantification um, that they provide for this, but could have a tiny bit of fluctuation built into it, which is kind of pointing to this being more of a quantum effect than it is necessarily one of um, an effect that would fall within the rubric of
Right.
relativity and Newtonian physics and so forth. So yeah, I even allow for that in my model. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah, I've got no issue with saying that.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I agree that like if let's say our science was wrong and the constants were actually different than what we thought they were, I think your argument would still stand. We would just move and say like, okay, it's these constants instead of these ones. We were wrong, but anyway, I'm curious to see what premise two is. Like we established that it is the case that the constants are this. We're gonna have a little asterisk there and say that like, well, it's at least possible they could be different. It doesn't appear to be necessarily true that they are the way that they are. It just
Sure.
it's right.
Premise two is pretty simple that the governing equations of physical laws demonstrate that these constants determine cosmic evolution through mathematically precise relationships. I cite to general relativity, Einstein's field equations, how these demonstrate the critical dependence of space-time dynamics on the gravitational constant and the cosmological constant. If the cosmological were slightly larger, space would expand too rapidly for structure formation. If it were slightly smaller, the universe would collapse before it could ever evolve. I devote quantum electrodynamics here. That defines structure constant appears in the equation governing all electromagnetic interactions. That slight variations would prevent stable atom formation, making complex chemistry impossible. And then
Yeah.
I evoke nucleosynthesis, that the equation governing hydrogen fusion, MP plus E, Mn
Right.
Z, depends critically on the proton neutron mass difference. Um, and not only the mass difference of the proton neutron, but the saturation levels of these different things, as in if there were more protons than there were neutrons, if that balance were different, uh, within a 1% margin or a 1% change would disrupt element formation, preventing the emergence of carbon-based life because we would never get any elements heavier than hydrogen or helium.
Okay, so the first premise was establishing data. Premise two is to make the actual argument. We're saying that all of these things derive from these constants, right? So these constants
Mm,
allow the development of this, and if the constant changed, we would not have these processes as we know them.
kind of. What is I'm laying the groundwork for what I introduce later in the argument as the sign principle, the simultaneous interdependent governing nexus principle, which is to say that these constants don't exist in a vacuum, right? So the gravity mass interaction or the speed of light, Planck time derivation interaction, or the strong and weak nuclear force and electromagnetism interaction, these things aren't just in a vacuum. These aren't just sets that are independent of each other. Uh, but that's later in the argument. This is just laying the groundwork for getting to. This is laying the foundations for the introduction of this principle
Okay,
that demands that these things be interconnected, interdependent, simultaneous, and instantiated at Planck time one, which is widely
okay,
accepted amongst cosmology. But I even relaxed that quite a bit.
okay, yeah. So you're throwing a lot out there. It does make it kind of hard to follow your premises. So if in the future, um, just to help me out, if you could lay your premise and then any example, if I ask you for an example, could you give me one example? Because you kind of throw a lot, and it it makes
Okay.
it kind of hard for me to follow. So I apologize. It gives
Sorry,
it
I'm
gives
not
me
trying to do that. I'm
it's
not trying
okay.
to do
It just gives me a little bit of Jordan Peterson vibes, but more word vomit. And again, no offense to you. I'm just saying that it's hard to
None
follow.
taken.
Um, so
Gotcha.
if you could just
Can I
repeat
try to?
the actual premise and then leave out the examples.
Sure. The governing equations of physical law, I'm sorry, the governing equations of physical law demonstrates that these constants determine cosmic evolution through mathematically precise relationships.
So cosmic evolution, and then could you describe what that means? Cosmic evolution through mathematical relationships. So like we can create mathematical models that do what? That show what?
Well, here I've got several listed right here. Well,
Yeah, give
do
me
you
one
have access
example.
to be able to open?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
sure.
can open
General
some.
relativity.
So
Yeah,
general
if you
rel.
can open,
So in what
yeah, just
way? And
click on my bio and go to the Google Drives link. It's the
oh,
document number one, the three pillars of divine necessity. There's no viruses or nothing. If you want an actual copy, I can just drop a PDF or Word doc, your choice, doesn't matter.
okay.
But it's all going to say the same thing.
Okay. Let me see if I can do this. You said it's in your
That way
profile.
you can follow along as I'm saying these things. Yeah, it's
It's
the
not.
Google Drive link
Okay, for
there.
whatever reason, it's not letting me see it. So I apologize.
No worries here. Do you want PDF or Word doc or doc text?
PDF would be fine. I don't care.
All right. Give me 1 second.
I'm
PDF
just,
for
I'm
me.
just, I'm just, I'm
No.
just, I'm just purely trying to understand the word choices you use and what they mean. So like evolution, evolution of the cosmos. Um,
Yeah, the cosmic evolution is going to describe how the expansion of space-time takes place, how nucleosynthesis takes place,
so,
how gravity starts taking effect and consolidating
so,
small pieces of
so,
matter into
right.
larger pieces of matter, allowing for
Okay.
cellular synthesis and so
So,
forth.
so,
Yeah,
so, I'm trying to understand at a higher level. So when you say the cosmic evolution, it's literally just how these mechanisms work,
yeah,
and they can be
that's
predicted
fair.
through mathematics.
Yep,
So things like
namely Einstein's field equations
yeah,
and
yeah,
and
okay.
others.
So
Yeah,
relativity, be explaining the mechanics of, how light relates to mass or energy relates to mass, through the speed of light or whatever. And there are other constants or other equations that show these mechanics of the universe. And
yeah. Like
okay,
for
okay.
instance, yeah, like for instance, like the speed of light. Speed of light's approximately 187,000 miles per second, right?
Right.
If it were the case that the speed of light were double that, say, was it 300? I'm not going to do that. Just say it's double that, right?
Right.
But what this does is it expands at the inflation event. If
Hmm.
things were to be expanding at double their speed, which was estimated to be the speed of light, that localized forces like gravity, strong and weak nuclear force,
Right.
electromagnetism, the fine structuring constant, these things would behave the same way, but they would produce entirely different results because the forces that affect the cosmic evolution of the consolidation from energy particles into subatomic particles, from subatomics to actual atomic particles, from atomic particles into larger structures, these things would necessarily produce different results because the things that they're interacting with are twice as far apart than they were in our universe
Yeah.
if the speed of light were twice what it is. And this would have expanded at twice the speed. That means the spatial parameters between the individual bits of energy that became matter, that became bigger matter, would have been spread out farther, meaning that the localized forces that drop off precipitously uh,
Yeah. So you're basically
would
saying
have produced different results. Yeah.
yeah, so you're basically saying it's a domino effect in the sense that like if like everything's in like a balancing state right now, and if one of the constants shifts, like the speed of light, for example, then we wouldn't have kind of those mathematical models work the same. Or like maybe equals mc squared would be different, but because that ratio is different, because the speed of light is different, it would also cause some other mathematical model to fall apart, and so it's like a cascading effect where just it doesn't allow the universe we see now if it was different.
Correct.
So if it was
Yeah,
different, it
that's
would be
that's
different. Not to
yeah,
undermine
yeah,
it,
it's
but
really
like or like
yeah, that's
maybe a later claim is that it can't be different. Maybe that's a later claim.
well, I would think that I don't know if it can be different. I'm kind of agnostic on this.
Okay, right.
I
So
don't
right. So
I
you
don't know if it could be different.
okay, yeah. So we don't know. We know that it is the way it is now, and so like we don't know if it could be different. So okay, so we've established that we have these constants. These constants build into via kind of this sort of balancing domino, if that analogy works at all, to like these mathematical models that explain our universe in a grander way. The interaction between atoms, the mass energy, equals mc squared, space time. Like these build into these other mechanisms. Okay, so what's the third premise? We basically just said kind of what is. So let's keep going. And I apologize for not being able to open your thing.
No problem. I did drop a PDF in side chat from my alt cryptic.
Oh,
Maybe
okay.
that'll work for you.
Cryptic was your. I was wondering who that was. Okay. Oh, you did it
Yeah, I'm a
through.
bit of a Luddite, so I have two accounts, one that runs from my laptop with all my files and stuff on it, and the other one because I can't figure out how to get my headset connected to my laptop and get microphone permissions turned
Yeah.
on it.
Okay,
I use
so
my phone for VC.
so let's see. Which section of this is it? Divine necessity. No, so it wouldn't be that one. So it would be which section? Do you know? Do you know which section this is?
Section one, existence, agency, and possibility.
Oh, it's just right at
Uh,
the top. Okay, okay.
yep.
The stage establishing hysteria, intelligent, causal. Wow, interesting. That wasn't the first premise you had before. Where do you have the premises, or is this stated in here?
The argument actually starts at, because see, we go through the introduction of the section, the
Yeah.
proprietary definitions I'm going to be evoking, and then you get to the teleomodal argument, the statistical reality of cosmic fine-tuning. That's where you're going to start finding the premise. The premise one, empirical demonstration of fine-tuning, that's where the quote comes in. Universe operates under mathematically constrained physical constants, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
Then premise two, physical law dependency on parameter precision. Then these are like headers
Yeah,
for
yeah,
the
yeah.
actual premise, right? So it's like a header for the premise or the title of the premise, then the
Oh, okay.
statement of the premise, and then
Okay, so let me
the
if you
the information that the premise is derived from. Yeah.
yeah, for like example, premise 1-1 is universe operates under mathematically constrained physical constants. Yada 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 yada. And then premise 1-2 or premise 2, whatever is governing equations, physical law demonstrate these constraints, term of cosmic evolution through matter. Okay, so I'm following
Mhm.
through that. So let's go on to the third because I think I've kind of at least in some way with like asterisk allowed for 1 and 2. That seems fine. It seems like sure. Through the thermodynamic laws impose strict constraints on any process that might generate the observed parameter values. Just saying that like basically if things were different, the dominoes would fall apart and things wouldn't work. We wouldn't get the universe we have now if the constants were different. That's premise 3.
No, we have it. No, and premise three is basically saying that based off of the empirical observations of the first and second laws of thermodynamics, there are absolute constraints that are placed on the way that the cosmos has evolved and can evolve, in particular in our universe, right? This isn't trying to look beyond what we know and what we know through science and empiricism, and that these laws of thermodynamics demonstrates that what's the adage that energy cannot be created or destroyed, or as otherwise says that energy states cannot change without external input, meaning parameters cannot self-tune without external causation. That's what I'm evoking with the first law, and that the second law, entropy, as it's famously known as, establishes that closed systems inevitably increase in disorder,
Mm-hmm.
preventing the spontaneous emergence of the precise order observed in the cosmic parameters. Meaning, if everything is going from a state of information A being the highest level of information and energy possibility or potential, and that it's increasingly or inevitably or constantly moving in one direction, which entropy has some absolutely tiny fluctuations involved in it, some gravitational effects there as theorized, but it would prevent spontaneous emergence of precision and order in these cosmic parameters because we're going from a state of maximum information and energy and we're degrading over time. So, in order for there to be an arrest of that progress, there would have to be an outside source pushing it in the opposite direction or instantiating this change or this deviation from this declining path.
Okay, so I would assume there's obviously sources to support, the entropy, for example. Closed systems inevitably increase in disorder, preventing the spontaneous emergence, of precise order observed in cosmic parameters. Um, Thinking about that.
Okay, so,
So, like,
okay, let me ask you this.
yeah, go for it.
I'll analogize this for you.
Sure.
If balls roll, right,
Mm-hmm.
and hills are inclines, If you place a ball at the top of the hill
Yeah.
and give it a nudge and send it rolling down the hill,
Hmm.
it won't stop rolling down the hill and spontaneously roll back up the hill without some kind of an external cause to it.
Right.
That's basically all this is saying.
Okay. Hmm. Right, because
The
you
incline
could.
is entropy, and the decline from the maximal state of information and energy to a minimum state at some point. We call this heat death. And
Yeah.
that in order for the precision to arise for these precision parameters and constants and so forth, this is additional information that would require an outside source to instantiate it because it's heading from maximal energy and information to minimal energy and information.
Mm,
So it's going
interesting.
in one direction, and to arrest that or to change it, it would necessarily require something external itself to do that. It doesn't do it itself.
Right. Okay. I see what you're saying. So I was going to say for the first law, I had heard of a potential hypothesis for that. The closed system, doesn't. I guess a closed system can't have more energy than it started with. You can't create energy. Energy has to be added, and that's implying the existence of something external to the universe to supply that. I had heard one model that says you can create energy as long as you also create anti-energy at the same time. It's sort of like matter and antimatter, right? Because matter and energy are kind of the same in a sense.
Yeah,
They're a constant variation. So there's at least, and it seems far fetched, but I mean, so does the idea of a non-physical agent with a mind that also isn't physical. That also, to me, at least, seems pretty far fetched. But the idea, at least, that it would solve the first law of thermodynamics if you just have the creation of energy and anti-energy, so that net change in the system is zero, but it just gets created. So that could happen. Now, whether I know that that happens or not, I have no idea. But that's one way that it would follow the rule and would not necessarily need an outside because it's not inserting energy. It's creating energy, but it's also creating not energy. It's leaving a net zero. Now the entropy one,
sure.
I don't know that. That's just one model I heard as like a potential rebuttals to that. That's a way the system could work. Um,
And look, I'll grant that it's logically
sure,
possible. I
sure. Well,
would
right.
say though that it's predicated on pure speculatory potential. It's not there since we don't have any anti-energy or anti-matter that we can
Well, I mean,
observe
antimatter.
via empiricism.
Well, I don't know if antimatter has. I think antimatter actually has been demonstrated, and perhaps other people in the chat can verify me on that. But I think antimatter was demonstrated, but I could be wrong. I think it's dark matter is the thing that's theoretically possible. So I could totally be incorrect on that. But I think antimatter was something that is. I think it was shown to be there, but I'm willing to hang that up. I don't know what to do about the entropy part. That one's going to be a bit too kind of tangle because you're right. Like even if we were to allow the first law of thermodynamics, well, actually, that's interesting. If the first law of thermodynamics was to resolve in the way that I would, so that you would have a negative energy, potentially you could also have entropy work in the other way, since you'd have a negative energy, right? And so maybe the antimatter works in that way. I mean, I don't know. That's entirely speculative. But let's say you could produce energy and anti-energy. That anti-energy then would cause the ball to always roll uphill, as opposed to rolling downhill. I don't know. That's speculative. I'm just couch, like not an expert at all. But
Well, I don't
and I
think
don't
that
know.
that would cause the ball to roll uphill. I think what that would do is negate the ability of the ball to roll it all because really all that's happening is the ball rolling is going from potential to kinetic, right? It's going the change in
Right.
state of the energy being exhibited here.
Right.
So what that
So
would say, if it was anti-energy, it would just simply say that there is no potential to be transferred into kinetic or somehow arrest the transfer of kinetic to potential to begin with,
well,
I
we're
think.
we're
But
also
I'm
in.
not apprised.
Well, I mean, we're talking about a positive matter ball falling, through the positive force of gravity, and there's also this hypothetical negative matter ball flying through what's supposedly negative gravity. So it's literally just the same. And they're in this hypothetical, it's created at the the singularity, right, whatever. And this again, this purely hypothetical, but it's a model that could potentially happen. You have this negative matter and the positive matter. They're one and the same. They're existing kind of. You can even think of it as a quantum entangled state where one is doing the same thing on both sides, and so they just cancel each other out. So maybe entropy is zero. Maybe entropy just cancels out. Maybe the whole system is just zero the whole time, and they're just canceling each other out. That at least seems like, I don't know. It at least could be the case. It doesn't seem like it's breaking any of these rules here, if that makes sense.
Well, I'll go ahead and
I've
a little bit of an olive branch concession that antimatter does exist. This has been theorized since I think like the late 1920s,
right,
and then formalized in the mid 30s. And then with particle accelerators and colliders,
yeah,
they have been able to instantiate antimatter, but that's only in the tiniest windows of time. I think it's even like it's measuring zeptoseconds, if I'm not
oh yeah,
mistaken.
because if it comes in contact with matter, then it probably blips, and maybe it doesn't travel
Exactly.
spaces. Right. So it's like in the scenario where it exists and it can't really stay, like it doesn't fit. So all I'm saying is like perhaps there's a different plane or whatever that antimatter exists on, because it can't exist maybe in the same space as regular matter, and so maybe they are mutually exclusive on this. I don't know. This is all. I'm not a fucking physicist, so I'm just throwing shit out
Me
there,
either.
and I apologize because I'm not nearly as read up. I'm just pulling shit out of my ass, trying to see why couldn't it be this way. So like, if that's the case, it seems like that wouldn't break either the first or second law, and it looks like Boltzmann's entropy formula would work, because all you would just have the quantities be the same but negative. It seems like you could still have this, and it wouldn't break any of these laws. I've given you an example that, at least hypothetically, I don't know if it's couldn't be this way, and it very much could not be this way. Maybe I'm totally floundering,
Hold on
but
a second.
yeah.
Well, I think that if it could be this way, that we would see a vastly different physical universe, in the sense that if it were the case that antimatter was more prevalent, or if there was a greater volume of it,
Hmm.
it would be canceling out real matter at a rate that we would be able to observe and detect. And it seems to me that if antimatter was a significant force at work in our universe, that it would have already long ago uh, canceled itself out, leading me to believe that there was vastly more real matter than there is antimatter, specifically because we didn't cancel out to zero, and we have a whole lot of matter that we can observe. In fact, there's so much matter out there that we can only observe about 5% of it, depending on which study you look at. The rest of it is attributable to dark energy or dark matter, and these
Right,
are
yeah, the hypothetical.
categorically not anti. Yeah,
Right, yeah, it's something different, right? Uh,
right.
so. I mean, yeah, and I don't know what that would look like. Like I said, there could be a different plane. Like maybe we're on, because the universe is more than just the three dimensions we're in. There could be multiple dimensions. Maybe there's a dimension where matter exists on one side and antimatter. And I don't know. I don't know that for sure. I'm just throwing shit out there because this hypothetically would not betray the laws, right? You could have the universe, the closed system being the universe, which is all the dimensions, and that they all add up to zero for whatever reason. And maybe the reason why we don't see it here is because it's in another one. Again, I'm making a claim that I can't falsify, but then again, we kind of both are. We're stating the universe has to be this way. There's no way to really falsify it. We're just saying that like the model says it this way. And again,
Well, I'm
we're
not
proposing. Well,
just to
yeah,
clarify. I'm not saying it has to be this way. I'm just
right.
saying that based off of everything that we observe, it is this way. Does that make sense?
Right. And so, like, as far as the constants, yes. What I'm saying is like, you know, as far as like applying these laws, you're making this statement. The implication is that it requires external causation, because that's one of your premises. It says parameters cannot self-tune without external causation, and I'm giving you as instances where it seems like they could. And so now, since we have two hypotheses that are both like potentially true, now we have to somehow exclude one or the other. And if we can't, and barring that, and I'm gonna admit I made a claim, I don't know how to disprove it, just in the same way, like, you can't necessarily disprove yours. So we're kind of in the same boat here, but it seems like we've come up with two different conclusions that can solve the same problems, and there's not really a way for us to exclude the other. So we're just kind of You're saying like here's
Can
my
you
proposed solution, and I'm saying well here's a potential other one. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the way that you're at. And I'm sorry if it's not.
let me ask you this?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, because I guess I'm unclear on the critique. Would you do me the courtesy of dropping the alternate hypothesis that you're proposing inside chat for me so that I can look at it? Because I'm not sure if you're trying to attack the laws of thermodynamics impose these strict constraints, or if the laws of thermodynamics would be different, or if they wouldn't exist. So I'm just not quite sure what it
Well,
is that you're proposing here.
I'm sorry. I don't know the exact name. I remember hearing about it, and it could be all bullshit. So I apologize if we're doing a hypothetical that just is disproven or impossible. So I really do apologize for that. But it's just the idea that the potential energy equals to kinetic energy or whatever. The delta Q or delta U or whatever is equal to the potential minus the kinetic energy, right? Is that, and the idea that for a closed system has to be equal to zero, otherwise it requires external energy. And so all I'm saying is like if you just are to generate both positive and negative potential and kinetic energies, that would still satisfy the equation. You would get zero in the closed system. That's what I'm saying as far as that
Right, but I
goes.
right, but if that were the case, then we wouldn't have usable energy, and we obviously have that.
No,
Well, I mean, we're
we
using
could
it right now.
no, we could have usable energy. It would just mean we would have negative energy somewhere. Like we could have the energy we have now that's usable, and then you could have the negative energy somewhere else. And again, it's just a possibility. But like you're saying that it can't be this way, that doesn't necessarily follow. It just means that the overall would be zero. It doesn't mean we have zero energy now. See what I mean? It's like I don't, and I'm sorry if it's hard because this is again challenging, and I'm not an expert in the field, and I don't even know if what I'm saying is even possible. I had heard it proposed. I don't know how likely. I don't know how well it's. But I think the existence of antimatter at least gives some credence to kind of my my
I'm
hypothesis
willing
here.
to I'm willing to grant that. And I was looking this up as we were chit-chatting about
Yeah.
anti-energy. As far as I can tell, negative energy is an established concept in physics with
Right.
specific applications, like in classical physics or gravitational potential.
Right.
Energy is always negative or approaching zero as objects move infinitely farther apart, which is why we have uh, the r squared
Right.
of the gravitational constant, right? Um,
Well, I would just say that
it
like
drops off
because
exponentially.
well, I would just say that
Uh,
because equals mc squared, if you have a negative mass, then that would generate a negative energy. No, am I wrong?
well, I
Because
I
they're
don't
they're related by
I
a
don't know
constant.
how that would function.
Well, equals
Well,
mc
yeah,
squared.
I just don't
Energy is
know
equal to
how.
mass times the speed of light squared. So if mass is negative, the energy must be negative, according to that equation.
Then we would have to. I would think that in order to for this to function bijectively or inversely, right, we would have to also have a negative speed of light squared, and
Well,
I
the
don't
speed
even
of
know
light
what
is
that would look
constant.
like.
The speed of light is constant according to that equation. So you could just have the negative
Or we'd have to
mass.
have like a speed of dark maybe squared. I don't even know what that looks like. Maybe
I
there is
don't
a
think
speed of
so.
dark.
Well, again, we're just using Einstein's equation, and you don't have to have the negative in front of the speed of light because that's a constant. You would just have the negative in front of the variables that change, mass or energy, right? And so speed of light could stay constant. Maybe speed of light is constant between whatever these two hypothetical planes, if they even exist on planes. Maybe they exist in the space that we have at somewhere else. I don't know. But like you could just
I
have
just
negative
don't even know
mass.
how that would work because
I have
light
no
has
idea.
physical mass in the form of a proton, and if it's traveling at that speed, it's going to encounter
Right.
other mass at
So if
some point. So if it's negative matter or antimatter traveling
right.
at the same speed of light, then that same speed of light negative matter traveling at that same speed would necessarily encounter light, which would make it not existent anymore because it's interacted with physical matter. So I don't know. I don't even know. Maybe
Well, it's
I'll
like
look into it, is
well,
the best I can tell you, but
I
I'm
mean,
not seeing anything so
all
far that would
the only thing
undermine what I'm
yeah,
saying
the
here.
the only reason I brought this up was to just generate a plausibility that hey, your claim might not necessarily be this way. It seems plausible that it could be something else. It's just, I'm just trying to poke holes in the premise here. Like, could it be this way? You seem to say that, like, well, you're not exactly sure it's not. And it, for all we know, it could be the case. I'm not going to, claim a victory here. I'm not looking for a victory. I'm just looking to have a discussion.
Doesn't represent anti-energy. Antimatter particles have positive energy, just like regular matter. Ooh, this is interesting. Antimatter particles have positive energy, just
Ooh,
like regular matter. As one
interesting.
physicist explains, the existence of antimatter does not imply the existence of some sort of anti-energy. Its
Ooh.
theoretical applications of negative energy include wormholes faster than light travel, as in negative energy appears in speculative theories of wormholes, where it's needed to keep the wormhole open, and theoretical principles for faster than light travel
Hmm.
at the Alcubierre Drive. I don't know how to pronounce that word. Um, Interesting. So if antimatter has a positive energy charge, then negative energy, oh, maybe that throws into question what we think about E equals MC squared
Right,
altogether.
exactly. It throws
That's
that out
interesting.
because if you have negative mass, how can you have a positive energy? Then the speed of light must be negative, which is weird. So that's weird.
Or
So
maybe there's
Hey,
a speed of torque that
give
has
me
to be calculated into this. I don't know.
what's that?
give me a rude interruption in the call speak sequence because I have 5 minutes less.
Okay. What's up, bud?
I fell asleep in a movie theater watching a Working Man. It has the bald guy who's in all of the action movies. I have no idea what it was about because I fell asleep. I have no idea how far through. So right now I'm in a movie theater. I have to go buy some. I have no idea. I'm watching the Minecraft movie now.
Have you been drinking, Bubba?
Oh yeah, but programming
Yeah.
while doing so. Yeah,
Oh
and by
god.
programming I mean reading a research paper.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Are you at home or are you at the movie theater still?
I'm at a city where it's basically like I'm gonna have to Uber home because like I don't because you understand that I have an OWI and OWI is the Michigan lesser equivalent
I
for a
I'm
DUI.
I'm brother, I'm well aware. We've had this conversation pretty much every time you get into one of these modalities. So I was just
Oh
verifying
no.
that you were either home or going to get an Uber. That's what I was concerned about.
That's so
You got the
funny.
No,
right
no, no,
mind. You're going to get the Uber, right? You promised me you're going to
He
do the Uber
interrupted to
thing.
say, "Hey
no,
guys,
no, no. I
I'm
I, I
drunk."
have to because I don't trust this city because this city makes its money off of parking tickets and DUIs.
And movie theaters.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Apparently,
So
movie
basically,
theaters.
like I woke up and like the screen is black, and I turn around and there's like 8 cool people, and I was like, "What the hell's going on?" And I'm like, "Oh, there's my popcorn. It's all on the ground." Should I pay for a ticket? I'm gonna pay for a ticket. I'm gonna. Yeah, but
Oh,
it doesn't matter. So this is my 4 minutes of I have 2.5 minutes left of a cigarette.
okay.
Going.
Well,
So
look,
I fucking jumped in because I love you guys, and I appreciate the rude interruption that you allotted me here.
Well, listen, brother. I'm just worried that I'm just concerned that you make the right decision. Will you do me a favor and just like take a screenshot of you ordering the Uber and text it to me, so just so that I have peace of mind? I'm not saying that you're not going to do it. Just saying that I would appreciate the peace of mind, not worrying about my buddy out there driving while sloshed. You know what I mean?
No, no. Well, I mean, technically, like I would not be at the point, even though I am ordering that because I don't trust the city, and like the fact is of like once it's in your blood, you're liable, and so on and
Right.
so etc. So I'm gonna DC right now because my cigarette is complete. Should I order a? I'm gonna buy a ticket. I'm gonna buy a ticket because I mean, like
Are you going? Are you
I love
going? Are
this
you
theater.
going back? Are you going back in to watch the Minecraft movie?
I am. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
You're such a you're such a child and such a dork. Just screenshot me that you get in the Uber if you could and text it to me. You've got my number. Just text it to
I
me so I have peace of mind. Can you do
my
that?
yeah. Well, I'm agreeing to you, but my agreement is just gonna be a fucking text because like I can send you a screenshot if you want, but I'm just gonna send you a text because you trust my word.
Fair enough. That'll work. I appreciate it.
Hell yeah. Okay. All right, peace out.
Love you.
And
Love you.
yeah, love you, bud. All right, peace out, guys.
Love you.
Yeah,
Love you, brother.
peace. Bye.
Oh my gosh. Best 5 minute interim.
Doc is great. I love that
Oh
kid.
my gosh. That's funny. Um yeah, okay. So the fact that antimatter has positive energy kind of throws my current, I mean, my very expert opinion on quantum physics kind of throws that out the window. But I mean, it just means that it disconfirms that hypothesis. I don't know. And like I said, maybe my model doesn't work at all. But
It certainly gave us something to think about, and I enjoyed that part of the
oh
conversation.
yeah,
So,
yeah. So it seems like that's the end of your like fine tuning bit there, because it looks like the final claim was just that it required an external thing to be right. It required because categorical
it's
probability for
negating the possibility of stochastic emergence given the constraints that we understand that do exist within entropy, right? That's basically all that premise was saying.
um let's see. So this is saying that we measure certain constants in our current universe, and just to summarize, we measure certain constants. Those constants, go into, you know, they produce the mechanics that our universe works in, and our universe has to follow these laws, and these laws require some sort of external causation. Kind of loosely, what these premises say. Yeah,
Well, no, let me clarify this.
yeah,
You had that mostly correct.
okay.
Um, we do have empirically observable laws and
Mm-hmm.
material conditions,
Yeah,
right? And that's what we
yeah,
call the constants, right?
yeah.
Then these constants and their quantifications and the material conditions that they interact with, or the forces that interact with these conditions, determine how the cosmic evolution unfolds. And again, this is all derived by empiricism and observation and science and so forth, right?
Right.
So basically, the constants and the conditions are connected to each other, that these connections govern how the cosmos evolves. And then three, that these connections and these quantifications can't be the product of some sort of stochastic emergence or cannot arise out of this downward trajectory absent something pushing them in a different direction because we, again, by using empiricism and observation, look at the universe and say, hey, there's these other two laws called the thermodynamics, and these thermodynamic laws tell us these things, and these things are as such that they travel in one direction or they don't change absent something acting upon it. And this is kind of a negation of the potential for these to emerge as an emergent quality or an emergent property because the direction that this universe is headed. Okay, this would be like right now we're inflating, right?
Yeah.
Where the universe is expanding, right? So this would be like saying um, that inflation has now reversed,
Mm-hmm.
absent something forcing that reversal, right? That's basically all it's saying here.
Right. Okay. Not.
Okay.
Okay. So like. Okay. So one establishing that there's constants. Two, that there's mechanics. Three, saying that the probability
These
of.
things are as they are, and that if they were to change, it would require something acting upon it. It would they don't just change themselves. This is kind of like evoking Newtonian mechanics
Mhm.
or Newtonian physics that an object in motion stays in motion, or an object at rest stays at rest unless acted upon by an outside force.
Oh,
The
okay.
same principle, but it's just evoking or leveraging entropy to say the same basic things here. Does that
Oh,
make
okay.
sense?
Okay. So yeah. So our, I'll just call it our local presentation of the universe. The constants won't change. They seem to be constant. They won't change. Um, right. But like if hypothetically there were, I don't know, other instances of universe, or I don't know if like you take the string theory thing, or some sort of multiverse thing,
Mm,
I don't know, there could
more
have been.
so that the constants exist
Yeah,
and the way that they exist governs the evolution of the universe,
yeah, one,
and that the
two.
evolution of the universe is moving in a linear path, and to change that linear path given the constraints of entropy would require something external to the system to change the path because every bit of evidence that we have says that this path is linear, kind of like time, right? So in order for us to reverse time, we would have to act upon time from an outside perspective. So that's really all this is saying. The constants and the conditions interact with each other as a as an entailment of a physical universe existing. The physical universe shows evolution
Right.
over the course of time from the beginning of the Big Bang to now, and that course of evolution is linear. That's what one, two, and three have said so far.
Oh, okay. And so, three being like it won't reverse. It goes in one direction.
Yes,
It doesn't seem to reverse unless there's something else. Okay.
exactly.
Okay. But like, I'm gonna take that olive branch that you extended, and I'm gonna wave it around, and I'm gonna say, well, you did contend or concede that like there could be a mechanism that doesn't break those laws that could potentially allow for those to change. Like,
It's logically possible. Yeah,
hey,
I'll
that's
concede that it's logically
hey,
possible.
logically possible doesn't mean that it is the case, but logically possible, it's not refutable at the very least. It is a possible proposition, which means that the claim it's not necessarily true that it has to be the case that you're saying. Which like I said, I
Sure.
didn't want to win, but that sounds like a win to me. No, I'm kidding.
No, I'll grant it. Look, I'll
Yeah,
grant it
that's
because, and I think you would agree with me here,
yeah,
because logical possibility can result in all kinds of absurdity. It's a really low bar, right? All it's
oh yeah,
basically saying is that there's no internal contradiction within the proposition. That's really all that logical possibility
yeah,
states.
yeah.
So I'm willing to go ahead and grant that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
oh yeah.
no problem
Just like what did they say, the greatest possible island, or whatever the ontological argument is, right? Like just
there.
because it's not, yeah,
The greatest possible pizza.
yeah, hell yeah. I had that last week. Anyway,
obviously has obviously has pineapple, by the way. Just saying,
ba-
bite me.
based. Um, uh,
So
the
are we cool to move to premise four yet? Because I don't think that we have terribly diverging positions yet. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, the entirety of the first section, uh, or the first argument is going to be really straightforward. There's really no presuppositions or novel things until we get to the third premise, and it's not even novel. It's just a mathematical application of Borel's law to what we've established in premises one through three so far. Um,
okay, so
but
trying to summarize, because what I'm saying is like, you know, it seems at least possible the constants could be different than they are now, and then maybe they also evolve, and then the third one saying that they can't change without an external force. That at least is philosophically possible. Whether it's what's that called? Inductively demonstratable. That's another question, but um,
yeah,
I,
basically the one through three to summarize it really quick, just so that we can push this forward is constants and conditions interact with each other and they're connected. Cosmic evolution depends on the interactions of these cosmic conditions, and that evolution tracks in a linear way and it flows with the arrow of time, meaning it doesn't devolve or re-evolve or unevolve absent some sort of thing changing the state of affairs. That's
oh
really all it's saying.
oh okay. So you haven't even made the claim, for example, that it is at least possible that the constants could be different. You're just saying that the way they are now, they produce something, and they will not change unless something acts on them. Is
Yeah,
what you're saying?
exactly.
Oh, okay. So I'm
Yeah,
I'm I'm maybe getting ahead of the game, but sure, I can move on to the next one.
cool. Uh, this is what I call the mindless agent hypothetical, right? So
Mm,
what I tried to do here was construct the maximally possible charitable hypothetical scenario for any kind of mindless causality to have been responsible for the instantiation of the things that were established in premises one through three, that material conditions and constants exist, that these material conditions and constants govern the way that the cosmos evolved, and that evolution tracks in a linear fashion. Uh, and this is based off of everything that we understand via empiricism and observation. So, what I try to do here is grant maximum possible charity. I've already granted charity in giving this causality or this instantiating force um, causal effect and agency, right? And this wasn't trying to infer some kind of mind into it, or agency into it, or causality into it. It was just to be more of a blanket term used to describe the broad array of alternative hypotheses. Some have agency, some have causality, some are just brute contingency. It was just to be a blanket term to envelop everything. The key delineation here is mindless versus mindful, right? The only thing that the mindless causal agent can't have is a mind. I'll grant everything else, right? Because if you were to say that it has a mind, then there's only a few possibilities that this agent could be. It could be alien, it could be extra dimensional, this kind of thing. But if you're going to claim that this instantiating force or causal agent has a mind, then we're basically describing God, regardless of whether it's some kind of alien or extra dimensional being that we just happen to call God. We're describing the same thing, just using a different word. So the only difference here that I'm insisting on is mindless versus mindful, right?
Okay. I
So
see.
that was just to clarify mindless causal agent. So I grant this mindless causal agent an iterative attempt per Planck time, which is the smallest unit of measurable time available, right? An iterative attempt using any kind of mindless causality that you can imagine or suppose or hypothesize, right? Any
Okay.
kind of mindless causality necessarily depends on some sort of random selection, stochastic emergence, brute contingency, one of these few things, right? There's a few uh, taxonomical categories that these fall into, specifically stochastic or probabilistic models, quantum and determinacy models, infinite regress models, emergent complexity, multi-universe selection, and conceptual or non-physical models like holographic universe or the mathematical universe via Tegmark. But rewinding back to this hypothetical scenario that I'm laying out, I'm granting this causality, this minus causal agent, an iterative attempt per Planck time, which is the maximum upper bound of attempts possible. And that's assuming that it can have these iterative attempts in the smallest unit of time measurable, right?
What do you
And giving
mean?
it
What do you mean by attempts? Attempts to what?
to generate the material conditions, the constants that govern them, that determine the cosmic evolution, and that track in a linear fashion, right? So I'm giving it this mindless causal agent, the iterative attempts per Planck second or Planck time since the beginning of the universe, since the Big Bang, to
Mm-hmm.
generate these conditions that we see via empiricism, these material conditions and the constants and the linear tracking of the evolution of the cosmos. I'm giving it an iterative attempt to instantiate the physical universe per Planck time since the Big Bang. Does that make sense so far?
So you're giving it each of these instances to be able to create the constants as we see them, or to
To create the constants, the conditions, and the cosmic evolution, right? To
to
be responsible for the universe's existence. I'm giving it an attempt per Planck time to be responsible for the existence of the universe.
so
Does that make sense?
you're so this creates the assumption that somehow, whatever the causing agent, we'll call it the causing agent, does not in itself have those, sort of, what am I trying to say? Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Well, let's continue, and maybe the question will come up later.
Sure. Um, Basically, this is claiming that the universe has a beginning, and it does, according to Borg-Guth-Lincoln theorem. We use this theorem that basically says things that are moving away from each other, and when you track those trajectories backwards, and everything that we track backwards has an intersecting point at one location, that it all started at one location means that the physical universe of space-time, matter, and energy has a beginning. This is one of the most powerful theorems that's been ever derived. It's almost a constant in and of itself, is how it's viewed.
You said
So I'm
Borels?
giving Borde-Guth-Vilenkin, I'm sorry, Borde-Vilenkin-Guth BVG theorem, but we're going to be evoking Borel's law here in just a minute.
Okay, sorry.
So, so we're going to grant this mindless causal agent an
Mm-hmm.
attempt per Planck second, right?
Sure.
Which I calculated at 14.5 billion years from the beginning of the initial inflation event, which is about 7 million too many, but that's fine. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Again, maximum charity, which comes out to about 10 to the 60th power attempts, right? One per Planck time.
Mm-hmm.
And then I apply Borel's law thresholds to it and evoke the same kind of probability that the fine tuning data was earlier established, right? The earlier probability of the fine tuning instantiating the way that it does now is 1 over 10 to the 167th power, right? So when we apply Borel's law to this mindless causal agent, to the iterative attempts possible at the upper bound possible of 1 attempt per Planck time, all the way back to the beginning of the universe, plus another 7 million years, I think it is, uh, what we come to is what is the probability that this mindless causal agent could have done this when we take into account this is the upper bound of possible attempts. This is what's considered statistically impossible, and these are the thresholds that it would have to meet 1 over 10 to the 167. So, could this mindless causal agent have done this given these parameters, which we know to be true? And there's 3 different ways that Borel's law can be applied. There are 10 to the 150th interactions, and this is the total number of atomic interactions since the Big Bang. This is every particle interacting with every particle on an atomic level. That's the total number of those particle interactions that could have possibly taken place, which still leaves us 17 exponents short of the 1 over 10 to the 167th that this mindless causal agent would have to hit. But it gets worse. The other way to look at this Borel's law application is to look at the physically possible, which is 1 over 10 to the 50th power, I think it is. I'm sorry, 10 to the 50th power is the way that this is quantified, which is magnitudes of order lower. And then the last one is the most relaxed, which is statistically impossible, which is 10 to the 43rd, or the negative 43rd power. So under no application of Borel's law do we even get close within 10 exponents, like close to the 17 exponent, within the realm of possibility from a statistical standpoint for this mindless causality to have instantiated the universe, which doesn't rule it out on a logical level. It's still logically possible. But this is even granting causality, agency, and the maximum possible attempts plus a few million years on top of it just for good measure. And even with those relaxed constraints and maximum charity granted, no mindless causality according to what we know to be true and this mathematical application of Borel's law, all 3 iterations of it. Under none of these circumstances can this mindless causality even sniff the jock of instantiation, given the constraints that we understand and are aware of. But I'm not saying that it's logically impossible yet. I'm still granting that it's still logically impossible, even though if something else were to fall or fail by these same parameters, it wouldn't be considered logically impossible by any serious mathematician or physicist, because if it's not going to fall within the bounds of at least the number of possible atomic interactions in the entire history of the universe, then it's not going to be logically possible according to any serious thinker. But I'm not going to make that claim yet. We get to that later.
Okay.
So,
and I might be jumping. I guess I'm wondering. And I might be jumping ahead of the premises, but like, so this is the Borel's law, standard for the universe as you've been describing it here. And I don't know if necessarily the way that you're describing it works, because it's assuming that the universe has chances to try other possibilities, or yeah, assuming the universe makes shifts and that it's not somehow constrained by some sort of unknown law to kind of gather at certain points, kind of like you ever see like what is it, like standing waves, right? You have the nodes and the antinodes, right? So maybe certain pockets of constants kind of gather. So like maybe the universe is like forced to create the const. This is so fucking out there. I'm just trying to think of pull shit out of my ass. So I apologize if this doesn't make sense. I guess what I'm saying is you're making this like, how do I know that the number that you're coming up with, the 10 to the 60 total attempts or whatever, that like that it needs that many attempts or anything. Like how do I know that like it doesn't just
It's not that it needs those. It's just that's the maximum possible number of attempts based on the time constraints, right?
okay.
If the smallest unit of measurable time is a Planck time and there's 10 to the 60th
Right.
Planck times available, and I grant an iterative attempt per Planck time, I'm automatically granting it the upper bound or the maximum threshold of attempts possible.
So what I'm wondering here, based on this, if say I was to make it 10, 10, and just make it 10, I still wouldn't hit the threshold of 10 to the negative 43 or 10 to the negative 50. If even if it had one approximation, I don't know. I don't like if a god came in, right? We would assume that he would only need the one instance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
so
And we get there
okay,
because there is a time constraint that we have to take into account because, again, via empiricism, we do know that the cosmos started evolving somewhere around 13.8 billion years ago, even though this is calculated at 14.5 billion, right?
right, yeah.
So, with that constraint alone, this minus causal agent, this is me kind of skipping ahead now,
Oh yeah,
this minus causal agent would have had to have done this out of the very first of the 10 to the 60th possible attempts. And that's not possible. We get there. We get to why that's not possible, but it's so much far and away worse than just being 107 exponent short or 17 exponent or 100 whatever the change difference is
right.
between 167 and 43. That'd be 123. Anyway, point being, or 19. Point being, though, it gets exponentially worse for this mindless causal agent.
All right,
Um,
let's then
but for
let's
right now, it's still logically possible, even though it's vanishingly small, indistinguishable from zero, is how it's described in mathematics.
I don't I feel like there's an assumption in this premise here somewhere that like it's kind of saying that the universe has to try all of these and come up with it, and that there isn't some like you would say God would create it because of his nature. Like, why can't I ascribe something like that to this mindless causal agent that you're calling it, and say that like due to the nature of this mindless causal agent, it requires the production of a universe the way it is now, or that the universe.
Because the mindless is the key here, right? It's
Yeah.
not that I'm saying that it has to have this number of iterative attempts, it's that I'm granting it this number of iterative
No.
attempts. In order for things to be the way they are, it would have had to do this
Mm-hmm.
13.8 billion years ago, or according to this model, 14.5.
Right.
And it would have had to do it at the very first attempt in order for the cosmos to evolve the way we see it, right?
Yeah.
And
Sure.
can verify through empiricism. So it's not that it has to, it's that I'm allowing it this. And even with that incredibly charitable, relaxed system of constraint application, it still can't meet the thresholds of what is statistically, physically, or theoretically possible.
Well, it's like, and I'm sorry if this doesn't relate, but it's like say I'm giving you a chance to roll like a Yahtzee or whatever, and or maybe not a Yahtzee. It's like you have to roll. You're given like 6 dice, and you have to roll. I don't know what it is. You have to roll like a 6 or lower, and then
May
I
I
fill
may
a
I
hat.
interject?
Yeah,
Because
sure.
I have an analogy that I think will really resonate with you,
Go
right?
for it.
Because
Go for it.
Yahtzee triggered it. This would be like playing poker. You're familiar with poker hands, like
Mm-hmm.
a straight flush,
Yep.
rarest hand poker.
Yep.
This would be like giving you the chance to draw a straight flush off of a 1-to-1, because we have an instance of one, a a one-handed deal, right? So it's you and the dealer. So
Right.
this is giving you the opportunity to draw a straight flush, and it's giving you 10 to the 60th powers of opportunity, 10 to the 60th power opportunities to draw this straight flush. But you have to draw this straight flush at some point in this process, in this chain of draws. You would have to draw it, I think, like 38 times in a row is how the mathematics breaks down to it.
So that so that's
Because
so that's an interesting thing because I like this analogy. So this kind of gets to kind of how I wanted to say it. So thank you for putting it this way. It makes it a lot easier. So imagine you're given those attempts, but
Mhm.
you're drawing out of a deck that only has those 5 cards, the flush, right? how do you know that you're given more cards than just those? That's what I'm challenging. Like, how do you know? Like,
Oh,
yeah, like if you had the
hmm.
mind thing, right? And the idea that God is a mind, and so basically he's taking cards out of the deck because you would say his nature makes him do certain actions. You know, he would do certain actions, or he wouldn't be able to do certain other actions, or he has a tendency for this. You're basically taking options out of the deck and saying that, like, so that limits him to really being the one most likely to draw these cards, because you have a whole deck of 52 cards to draw this flush, but God's only got 10 or something, or maybe it's even less than that.
Well, I think I see what you're saying. And even though it kind of breaks the analogy or the hypothetical, I'm willing
Yeah,
to engage with it.
sure.
What I was trying to use the analogy to do was demonstrate how granting these attempts, right,
Mm-hmm.
is comparable to the the drawing of the straight flush hand, right?
Yeah.
It's a and I think it would require, if I remember the analogy correctly, I'd have to look it up to be certain, so don't quote me on this.
Sure.
'Cause I don't really value analogy a whole lot. I like numbers.
Sure.
But if I'm not mistaken, the probability of you randomly selecting, or any, not you, but anything
Right.
randomly selecting the constants and the values that govern the expansion of the universe without some kind of outside agent acting or force acting upon it to guide it in this direction is like drawing 38 straight sequential
Yeah.
straight flushes, right? Which is already a really low probability. It's the rarest hand in poker.
Well,
So you'd have to do that 38 times in a row, or flipping a coin um, a trillion times and landing heads every time, or guessing a thousand digit um, code on a bike lock. It's got 10 digits, 0 through 9. You have to guess a thousand digit
yeah,
code with zero priors the very first time,
right.
kind of deal. Like, these are the kind of realms of probability that we're operating within. And,
Right, but what I'm saying is, how do you know that it could be any other way? How do you know that you could draw anything other than a flush? That there are other cards. That's the assumption. The assumption is that there are other cards and you're trying to draw it. And so we're going statistically based off of all the possible ways the constants, would have to go through.
okay.
We're trying to say how many iterations are
I
even
see.
possible,
I
but
see.
like maybe it's only one iteration that's possible. Like, how do you know that it
I
has to
see.
be other iterations? Sorry.
I see. I no no no. I'm following with you now. Thank you for clarifying. Um, I am pseudo agnostic. I tend to lean to the idea that it couldn't have been another way, or it's not nomenologically possible for it to have been elsewise. But I think that not only doesn't preclude the God hypothesis, but it reinforces it. And in order for it to have necessarily been this way, or this is the only nomenologically possible instantiation, I think that even further compounds the mindless causal agent problem. Because if it necessarily had to be this way, what this is going to ultimately run into is, if that it is such that it has to be this way, then there has to be something that determines that this is the only way that it could have been.
Sure.
And if you're saying, or we're going to allow that it could have been elsewise, now this is going to introduce, paradoxically almost, this new set of confounding variables that any kind of mindless causality would have had to sort through in the iterative attempts to bring it into actuality.
Hmm. Well, the way I try to mind this argument is to say that, like, I'll grant like the same conditions that you would say a mindful agent would need, to an extent, minus the mind. Like, what are the basic things needed? It'd have to be uncaused, spaceless, timeless, immaterial, whatever. I'm willing to grant all of that for this cause. It's just then it becomes a mind, and I'm like, okay, how can we ascribe that it has to have a mind? Um,
Ah,
how
it's a
can we
great question.
how can we I'm sure it's in one of your premises, but how can we describe it has to have a mind? You talk about the Trinity. I'm sure there's something in there, like, how do we know it has to be a Trinity? And then at this point now we're talking purely philosophically, because this is
Well, Well, you're right in a sense. You're
yeah.
right, and I promise you we get there. If you'd like to, we can kind of fast forward a little bit, and I can give you brief recaps over the next couple of premises, because really all it does is it reinforces the stuff that we've already kind of at least loosely agreed to.
Sure.
Um, so what I After doing the mindless agent hypothetical, where I
Yep.
give the maximum possible charity and apply Borel's law, and it's still not possible under those constraints, what I do is I further illustrate this by breaking down all of the possible mindless causal agents into taxonomical categories, and then all of the possible failure points into their own categories, and do an analysis as to where this category of agent fails on these success criterion. So, for instance, that's where this chart comes in premise 2.2, the categorical failure matrix of mindless causal models. Uh, it shows that, for instance, a stochastic or probabilistic model would fail under Borel's law of statistical impossibility, quantum constraints. It passes infinite regress, but fails under information theoretic limits, which is the NP hard limit, or Wolfram style irreducibility. Then it fails on measure selection bias. It doesn't violate the PSR, and it doesn't violate Gödelian incompleteness. But I have 6 total categories that all non-minded causalities can possibly fall into. And I made these very broad intentionally, uh, so as to encapsulate or incorporate every potential possible alternate hypothesis. And they all have varying degrees of critical failure points that either violate some kind of a physical law or some kind of logical law, or
Yeah.
mathematical law in the case of Gödel.
Well, like for example, in 2.2, we already talked about it in 2.1, but I'm already doubting the application of statistical impossibility to Borel's law, even, because again, this is assuming they have to draw out of X number of cards in a deck, whatever the number is. And I'm saying that, like, it at least seems plausible that it could be a different way, or that it could be only the one set of cards, to keep the analogy going. And so I'm already kind of
Sure.
disagreeing with this. So if what I'm saying is, if your other premises have to build off of this, then I'm not willing to accept those. So I hope the whatever premises you're bringing up in the future don't build off of this, because I'm not accepting this one. And I think you would agree. It at least seems
That's
philosophically
fine.
possible. So okay.
Yeah, okay, that's perfectly fine. Really, premise 2.1, the maximally charitable formulation,
Right.
uh, that's not germane necessarily. It's not even necessary. It's more of a reductio ad absurdum to demonstrate that once we apply uh, these thresholds of possibility via Borel's law, um, it it fails to do
Right.
so. And then
Yeah. If you
going
assume.
further into it, that's just the statistical impossibility category of
Well.
failure.
Well.
But then I apply other categories that must be met in order for this to be the case, which are quantum constraints, infinite regress, information theoretic limits, measure selection bias, PSR, and Gödelian incompleteness. And every one of
Right.
these models, if we completely omit the statistical impossibility derived out of 2.2, I'm sorry, 2.1, they all still fail across at least one of these other critical failure points. In fact, I think all of them fail multiple different critical failure points, and some of them just fail across the entire board. So this isn't the only constraint that we're taking into consideration here. I really tried to be expansive in
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
not only the the criteria that had to be met, but the charity granted to all mindless causalities, and trying to determine which models and or kind of models, I should say, fail under which kind of constraints. So this chart just shows you which category of models would fail which constraints. And then below this in, let's see, 2, 3, and its subcategories 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Oh, okay. So so
6.
so in the later sections you go over the other possibilities, because I was going to make a complaint that you only really covered statistical impossibility, but it looks like you do extend the other possibilities later and talk about how
I
they're.
do. I do.
Oh, okay, okay. I was going to say, like, that's kind of sleazy. You just have the one in there, huh? But I wasn't going to
Well,
assume
no,
a charitability. So.
well, I appreciate that. I do appreciate that. And again, look, I, my whole goal with this wasn't to
Hmm.
presuppose something and then prove the conclusion, right? My whole goal was to start from a true neutrality
Hmm.
and ask myself, is there a way to justify that we know from a non-theist position, and just strictly within the domain of what they would appeal to as authoritative or acceptable, work our way to uh, what I know to be true, right?
Hmm.
Just by way of applying these very same systems that they would appeal to as well. I think we can universally appeal to things like empiricism, science, math, and logic. So that's what I
Right.
used in deriving this section, right?
Well,
So
yeah. What and I understand you like wanting to come from a place of neutrality, but you see like already like in the statistical impossibility example that you were already making assumptions that were not necessarily neutral. If you see what I'm saying,
well,
because
not
I gave
really,
you.
because those assumptions, I want to push back on that a little bit, because those assumptions are widely accepted by the most brilliant minds in these fields that are not theists. In fact, I specifically referenced non-theist experts. I didn't want my experts list to be comprised of entirely theists because that would be sleazy, right?
Okay.
So I looked for experts that agree or affirm these very same statistical uh, data sets that I'm pointing to as as the people who I would cite to affirm the claims that I'm making, and they do.
Okay.
Uh,
So
and there's another.
so the
Go
claim.
ahead.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt, but like you're saying that
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
you're claiming that like there are non-theist physicists who would admit that it is extremely unlikely, and they might even bring up Borel's law, impossible. And maybe that's a too big of a claim that the universe could exist in natural means. So there are people that aren't theists
Yeah,
that
sure.
would
Like
say that.
Penrose, yeah, like specifically to the fine tuning and the probability analysis in it. Penrose quote in The
Yeah.
Emperor's New Mind, 1989 says, "In order to produce a universe resembling the one in which we live, the Creator, capital C here, would have had to aim for an absurdly tiny volume of the phase space possible universes." This is commenting on the extraordinarily precise initial conditions of the Big Bang required for life-permitting universe.
Hmm.
He's basically affirming the probability of fine tuning claims. Then a second follow up quote here from his book, The Road to Reality, 2004. There appears to be some profound connection between the very existence of consciousness and the possibility of conscious thought being properly modeled by computational process. This is evoking the NP hard limit that I point to in the critical failure point. Sorry, wrong document. Of theoretical information theoretical limits for by yeah information theoretical limits is what he's speaking to here. So yeah, we got quotes from Penrose. Hold on, let me get back to this. So those were just two quotes from Penrose,
Right.
who is probably the most brilliant cosmologist to have ever lived. And I can
Sure.
provide similar quotes from Weinberg,
I
Ross,
mean,
the
I'm
Lincoln,
no,
Guth,
I'm okay. I'm
Krauss,
okay
Carroll.
with the quotes. I mean, that doesn't. I mean, that doesn't really. I guess matter to me much. I don't know. It just seems like a bit much to kind of claim that. What am I trying to say? To me, like, I don't think I've heard any of the, at least not that quote or anything else say that, like, the statistical probability has to be that way. I think it's still making assumptions that we're probably not justified in making. They're just saying what is, and like this requires something that's not measurable, of course. That the constants had to be this way. It's just a philosophical possibility. But I mean, we would say the same thing about God. Like, the God, like you said, the capital C creator would have to thread a needle in order to get these this way. But we would say, oh, but there are certain constraints to God that make it so that, you know, uh, like he had to produce the universe the way that it is now versus other
I that's
possibilities.
kind of where I land,
Right.
honestly. That even with his omnipotence, right, with all of
Right.
these confounding variables, if we were to analogize it with, like, say, the
Hmm.
three body problem,
Yeah.
we can't, even with our advances in mathematics and sciences and probability and projection and all these other things,
Right.
we can't figure out how three bodies interact in gravitational fields
Hmm.
with any kind of motion, right?
Hmm.
Um, and imagine that from the micro of subatomic particles to the macro of galaxies
Right.
and the rest of the cosmos. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I would think that this isn't a limitation of God necessarily, but more so an example of just how powerful this God must be. Right? This is like an assumption of mine, and I'm fully comfortable with making this claim that this is how incredibly knowledgeable or omniscient and incredibly powerful or causal that this God must have been in order to not only identify the extreme tiny window of possible scenarios that permit this life permitting universe and instantiate exactly that. I don't know if it could have been different. Um,
Hmm.
I'm agnostic on that to an
Right.
extent, but
Right.
I kind of lean towards the idea that it probably had to be this way. Uh,
Hmm.
and and I think that this is kind of philosophically and theologically justified when we start looking at things like natural evil or disasters that cause suffering and so forth, right? Because my position there would be, well, bad thing happened like volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, tsunamis, this kind of stuff. These things are all necessary things in the evolutionary pathway for human life to be here, to make this observation and to level this critique at all. So I kind of think that this fits in the model of natural evil, that seems to ring of the truth that this must have been the material conditions in the state of affairs. Um, but I'm not 100% committed to that position.
Hmm.
Give me a couple of minutes though. I gotta
That's
get my
okay.
kiddos to bed. I
No,
will be right back.
no. I actually, I think I'll get off myself because it's also late and I have work tomorrow. So I think we'll put a pin in this. I'll probably be on in the future because we've already had an interaction, and then we'll just continue from your section two, and we'll go from there.
All right. If you don't mind, can we take like 2 or 3 minutes and just kind of blow through the remaining section of this first teleomodal argument, because I can wrap it up really quickly,
If you're
and
willing
that'll
to,
give us a good launching point for the next time we pick
yeah,
it up.
if you're willing to do that before putting your kids to bed, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I can do that.
Okay. Screw
So
the kids. No,
basically,
kidding. JK,
no, don't do
JK,
that.
JK,
Like
JK.
not only my kids, but it's like kids in general,
I,
bro.
bro. Oh no, I don't want to be banned. Mods, please. No.
Okay. So basically, I lay out the taxonomical categories of all potential models and critical failure points that any model would have to satisfy, and do a deep dive analysis on as to why each kind of model fails. I list out different specific models that fall into these categories and why they specifically fail. That's two. I'm sorry, that's 2, 3, 1 through 4 or 5. Yeah, 1 through 5. Then when I move into the sign constraint satisfaction, and the sign principle is a novel derivation of a principle that I came up with that replaces the bijective functionality that I thought that these constants and conditions interacted through. But it's not strictly bijective in a mathematical sense, so I had to scrap it
Yep.
and replace it, which is why I wrote my own. But it holds, and I've got the formalizations and the execution and the derivation for that available if you'd like to see it. Um, so let's see. It applies this a little bit prematurely because I dedicated an entire syllogism to it. Uh, then I get into quantum information constraints as absolute barriers, because quantum mechanical models are often something that people would appeal to as a type of model that's not fully fleshed out. So I dedicate a whole section to it, and describe how quantum models also fail under these same constraints because they necessarily rely on the very things that they are used to explain the instantiation of. For instance, quantum fluctuations require time, temporal spatial um, canvas to work upon in order for them to work at all. They require time, as in all of the quantum iterations, or all of the quantum interactions are based off of probabilistic scenarios, and probability necessarily takes time in order to obtain. So long story short, it just eliminatively deduces that these categories of models cannot possibly have done this within the realms of the constraints that are established through empiricism. But I'm not ruling out as logically impossible yet. I'm still granting it the um, insanely low probabilities of 1/10 to the 167th, after applying Borel's law and all this stuff, just demonstrating that even with these relaxed constraints and so forth, minus causality just statistically can't do it, even if it is still logically possible. And that's where the end of the first argument concludes, is while it's not, well, I'll just read it, that the comprehensive analysis of the minus causal agent models demonstrates their failure to not merely statistical but metaphysical. Even with maximally charitable assumptions, MCA models fall many orders of magnitude below statistical possibility thresholds. Each taxonomical category of MCA model fails due to multiple independent constraints, creating a robust exclusion across all conceivable formulations. I want to skip this one because that is further illustrated later. That quantum information constraints provide absolute barriers that no quantum-based MCA can overcome. Therefore, the impossibility of a mindless causal agent is established not merely as a high improbability, but as a metaphysical necessity. That's out of place because it's ahead of its time. I should probably fix that. Creating an irreducible requirement for non-mindless cause, meaning when we look at what we know and can verify through empiricism and science and math and logic and these things, that it creates an insurmountable barrier for mindless causality to overcome based off of everything that we can apply to it, like the systems of math, for instance. Statistical probability says that it's impossible, even if logically we can't rule it impossible just yet. And that's where this section kind of leaves off. And then I introduce a the logic aspect of it. This is all just full disclosure. The entire position is undergirded by S5 modal logic, which is the analysis of possibility in all possible worlds and necessity versus contingency. Um, and basically, the ending section of this is simply codifying what we've already said through logical symbolism and formalization. That's really all that the final section is saying. To this particular argument,
Okay.
is there anything important? Yeah, this is basically walking through like the science and the math stuff that we've already covered
Yeah.
and applying modal collapse scenarios to each of these other sections. So it's kind of like a cross validation matrix of not only math and empiricism, but logic and modality. So
Okay.
by the end of this, long story short, it just says we can't say it's logically impossible just yet, even though it is. Uh, well, we could say it's logically possible, but we're going to continue granting maximum charity and abstain from saying it's logically impossible until we prove that it's logically impossible. And we do that in the next argument. That's what it is. That's the first
Okay.
that's the first argument of the position. That's the teleomodal
Okay.
argument.
Well, okay. So the next time we come back, we'll just continue from 2-3 and see what we get because I want to explore these other options as part of
Sure.
your thing because I think that's where we're getting hung up is I'm I'm already finding some issues in yours that I don't think you're maybe addressing isn't the right word. It's at least not satisfactory to me, which who the hell am I? So maybe I don't matter, but it seems those are what I'm hung up on. So well, we can continue from there, and maybe by the end of your whole argument thing, maybe I'll be exactly where you are, and I'll be a Christian again.
Well,
So
look, brother. I first off, I really appreciate the candor and the good-natured back and forth that you and I have had. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I just want to be very clear about something. I'm not going to try to convert you. I'm not here to make you a
oh,
Christian.
I
I can't do that.
yeah
I
no I
can't do
agree,
it. It's not within my possibility. I cannot do it. I'm not going to try to convince you or anything like that.
and
I will be honest with you.
no I absolutely and I
My,
appreciate that, and I feel the same on my end. I'm not here to convince you. I'm here to understand your position, to try to ask questions, and then the ultimate goal is to learn something. So when I made that quip about maybe changing my mind, it was more like hey, uh, like wouldn't that be cool? But if everything goes and it satisfies, I guess my questions and satisfies it to the point where I kind of stuck and I
that would
have
have
to
made the
accept it.
thousands of hours that I've poured into this worth every second of it. I would not only cool, but that would be one of the coolest things that I have the pleasure of experiencing in this world. But again, this is only to
Right.
demonstrate to the person that says that God is not possible, that not only is God possible, but God is necessary.
All right.
I'm not going to make any doctrinal or theological claims of a particular denomination or anything like that. Like, I'm not trying to convert you, just
Oh
to
yeah.
show you that using your own systems and standards and metrics and so forth, that it is possible. Because if you never think to yourself, hey, this is possible, then you're never going to give it the time of day. And I think that only when people give God's possibility the time of day do they actually do the one thing that's required of them
Mhm.
and actually reach out to this God. Uh, does that interaction actually start to happen? Because I knew all this stuff going into um, my experience with God, and I still didn't believe. And it took direct experience for me to believe because I'm stubborn and hard headed and
Yeah.
just smart enough to be dangerous to my own
Right.
self. So all I'm trying to do is illustrate to other people the same kind of path that I traveled to get to the possibility so
Yeah.
that you can understand it experientially, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that's what it takes for everybody. So
Sure.
this isn't a ministry of sorts. It's more of a
Mhm.
demonstration of the possibility
Yeah.
so that you can engage from a place of um, having true information to work with. That's all.
Yeah. No, and just, like my approach is just to try to know the truth and to approach it, you know, to learn more. So that's it. And again, I wouldn't be too hopeful on it convincing me because I'm already finding some problems. But hey, who knows? Maybe that'll change by the end. But
That's
enjoy the
perfectly fair, bud.
yep, enjoy the
Perfectly fair.
discourse. Good night to you and your kiddos.
Hey, likewise, Ben. Are we friends yet? If
Yeah,
not, I want to
I
keep
sent
your
you a
friend
friend
request.
request. I sent you a friend request a while ago.
Good deal, bud. It was a good chat. Really appreciated it. Really enjoyed it.
Yep. All right. Catch you later. Oh boy. Hmm.
Well, in the meantime, I want to take about 5 minutes and go put my micro terrorists to bed. In the meantime, if anybody's got objections to what has been covered previously and want to bring them up, feel free to get those worked out and chambered, and I'll be back to take your best shot in just a few minutes.
So I'm gonna be going to bed, but in the meantime, like, is he like a mod here or something? I've only interacted with him a couple of times. No answers.